Good afternoon and welcome to today's Exeter Institutogram conversation with me, Sajjad Rizvi, from the Institute of Arab and Islamic Studies at the University of Exeter. And today I will be in conversation with Nauman Naqvi from Habib University in Karachi, and we'll be talking about his work, in particular talking about the notion of a reparative curriculum. Now let me get Nauman into the conversation. I've just requested this. It should open up in a second. Oh, declined. Let me try that again. Just wait for Nauman to patch in. Nauman's a philosopher who's worked in critical theory. Hi, Nauman. Salam. How are you?
Hi there. Assalamu alaikum.
How are you? Good to see you. I was just trying to do the quick introduction and just say who you are, and I just gave the title of what we'll be discussing today. But before we actually start talking about that, maybe you can tell us a bit more about who you are and the work that you do at Habib.
Who I am?
Yeah.
That's a hard one. Huh? Well, at Habib right now, I no longer have any administrative responsibilities. I'm an associate professor in the Department of Comparative Liberal Studies. But I was the first faculty member that was hired at this university, this new university, which started in 2014.
Right.
And I was then the dean of the School of Arts, Humanities, and Social Sciences. I was also the director of the Habib Liberal Core Curriculum, which I had a substantial role in designing.
Right.
And then I was the director of this new department, Comparative Liberal Studies, but I'm thankfully no longer in any kind of administrative position.
It's always a relief to move on in that way.
Yes.
So if you could say something about the title that you gave me for our conversation, Towards a Reparative Curriculum, how did you come to that, and why do you want to talk about this?
Towards a Reparative Curriculum. Well, we live in I don't think that's a secret today. Well, it's always a kind of open secret, I guess, that we live in an extraordinarily damaged world.
Right. Yeah.
Our world is just extraordinarily damaged. I mean, ecologically, that's obvious to everyone at this point. Well, of course, it's never everyone. But because we know that there are a lot of people, in fact, there are a lot of very, very powerful people who don't think this, who don't recognize that we live in a profoundly ecologically damaged world. But the damage doesn't stop there. Yeah, it doesn't stop with the ecology. We are all very, very damaged people. Yeah, having lived in a very, very damaged world, it's inevitable that we ourselves will be damaged. We live in this world. The world makes us who we are to a very, very substantial extent, to a much more substantial extent than we want to recognize, in fact. So the damage is both ecological, it's moral, it's ethical, it's spiritual. So all of that damage, it's really, it's not possible for a single human being, or possibly for even a lot of human beings together, because we have all been formed by this world, to repair that damage. Yeah, but clearly it does need to be repaired, a lot of it. Yeah, we have our work cut out for us. Yeah, so that reparation, of course, the reparative aspect, apart from repairing in that more therapeutic kind of mode, which is also cognitive. Therapeutic is, first of all, cognitive. So that work of reparation, of course, also in the post-colonial context, or a post formal decolonization context, yeah, necessarily also has that connotation of reparations. Yeah, so it has a decolonial aspect.
Right.
So, I mean, it has a lot to do with, my own life experience, which is never one's own personal experience. It's also a historical experience. Yeah, I came into an undergraduate education in the United States at a time, in fact, when core curricula, I was at this place called Reed College, Liberal Arts College. Core curricula were, very, very hotly contested. It's part of what they call the culture wars in the United States. Yeah.
Of course. Yeah.
And there were many different aspects to those culture wars. One of them was precisely about the experience of colonialism, which was not reflected in the humanities curricula. I mean, I'm talking about the late 80s.
Yeah.
In the humanities curricula in the West. And on my own campus, the fight was so hot that some of the old timers were willing to shut down the college to not have to teach, a whole bunch of new texts as part of basically, the historical and intellectual heritage of the 20th century, the late 20th century world. Yeah. So, it comes from a whole bunch of different experiences like that. Also, having worked before I returned to the academy in the development world, I was very influenced by the critique of development. I worked at a place called the Sustainable Development Policy Institute with Dr. Tariq Banouri. And at the time, there had been this anthology about decolonial knowledge. This very idiosyncratic economist at Harvard, Margolin, and his wife. The Margolins, they're called. Frederick Margolin, that's the wife, and he's Stephen Margolin. Yeah, he's a very heterodox kind of economist. They put together an anthology, and I was, I'd just come out of college, and I read that, and I read the Development Dictionary, and I met Ashish Nandi when I was working for this Sustainable Development Policy Institute. I'm talking about when I was in my early 20s, really. So that was all there in the mix too. So towards a reparative curriculum, I think that's what we need. We need so the first part of any therapeutic project. Yeah. Once again, I'm talking about cognitive therapy. Therapy is a matter of cognition. First of all, therapy is a matter of cognition. Yeah. And that's true even in psychoanalytic therapy. Yeah, that's one should think of it as cognitive reparation. Yeah. The first part of a therapy is actually very therapy is not a pleasing or a pleasant experience. Therapy is actually very painful. If anybody who has actually gone through rigorous psychoanalytic, I myself haven't, but I know people who have. I wish I had the opportunity. I haven't had the opportunity. But those people who I do know who have been through this tell me that, in fact, the first part of any therapeutic experience is you just sitting there and bawling for session after session, right? So that, because it's the recognition of the damage, yeah?
Right.
So the first part of any kind of reparative...
Or the realization of trauma.
Or the realization of trauma, which is one and the same thing. Yeah, the realization of trauma is the recognition of damage. Yeah, of the extraordinary damage that one has suffered. Yeah, and how could we not have suffered? Yeah, I mean, these have just been really terrible centuries. These past 2-3 centuries that the planet has been sort of, I don't know if there's a strong enough verb for what has been done to us over the past 3 centuries, and as a result of who we are, as a result of which who we are today, yeah, and who in terrible trouble on the one hand, yeah, and on the other hand, just phenomenally ill prepared to deal with that trouble, yeah. So the first part of the project, so the way the core curriculum at Habib is designed is we work kind of backwards, which is necessary. So first part is called, they have all fresh persons in the college, whether they're in science and engineering or in the School of Arts, Humanities, and Social Sciences, have to take a course in the second semester of their freshman year called "What is Modernity?"
Right.
Yeah. And obviously, that's just an absolutely crucial question. It's I mean, after all, we all want to be modern, and that's clearly a historical category. I mean, there's just it's implicitly historical. When you say you are modern, yeah, or you want to be modern or whatever, that you're making a historical claim, yeah. So it's a historical question, and we clearly need to. I mean, okay, you want to be modern, or you are modern. Wonderful, that's great. Let's find out what this modernity thing is. Yeah, that's clearly something that all of us have to do. In fact, all of us do, but you know, we do it in a terribly ill-informed fashion. So systematically, what is modernity? And you know, of course, given the nature of the past couple of centuries, especially the past century and a half, and of course, it's an accelerating process. Yeah. So so much. I mean, nearly all of. I mean, what has happened in your and my lifetime? Yeah. That amount of stuff hadn't happened in thousands of years of human history. Yeah, it's just it's a constantly accelerating, and we now call it the Great Acceleration. Yeah. So so first of all, what is modernity? And then it starts out with, first of all, questioning the very basic category. The first module, it's 5 modules. First module is called Modernity and World Historical Identity. Yeah. Because modernity is a world. When you say you are modern, you are making a very specific claim about yourself. You're making a world historical claim. You are situating yourself in world history, which is also itself a modern category. Yeah. So what is this world historical identity? And which is, of course, tied to progress. Yeah. So the first part is, I mean, actually what they start out with, which they read over the winter break, before they arrive for their second semester, is Sven Linkwit's Exterminate All the Brutes. Yeah. So it's a record, especially in the 18th and 19th century, phenomenal genocide. Yeah, unprecedented genocide both in North America and in Africa. Those are the 2 places that he's looking at. Of course, one could easily look at South Asia as well, where these unprecedented famines, and we do in the course also look at, you know, completely historically unprecedented famines. You know, something like 30 to 100 million people. There's nothing like this in all of human history. Yeah, what happened over these couple of 100 years? Yeah, even in South Asia, especially you know, the past 200 years, you could say. Yeah. You could start, I mean, a good place to start would be 1770 with the famine, once the British started administering this unprecedented famine in Bengal already in 1770. So the first thing they look at is precisely the linkage between this idea, and this is what Sven Linkwit shows, between the idea of progress, yeah, and this extermination. Yeah. It was, in fact, in the 19th century, it was not uncommon, and you can see, you know, social Darwinism is once again alive and well. Yeah. So in our own times, yeah, it's amazing. I mean, actually, it's not surprising, yeah, because it's so closely linked to the idea of progress, both historically, and I would argue that conceptually and structurally also, so closely tied, social Darwinism and progress. They just fit, you know. They just click together like that. But the idea was, I mean, you know, people were saying in the 19th century, look, what other proof do you need for the fact that we are historically superior? Yeah, that we have made progress. Look, we've killed hundreds of millions of people. What other kind of proof? What other proof do you need? Right? I mean, this was said quite explicitly. Yeah, this kind of thing was said quite explicitly in the 19th century. So the first, modernity and world historical identity, and of course the other side of that is the idea of progress emerged from within debates within Protestant eschatology. So that's the other. It was very much a product, as has been shown in a number of works of debates that happened within Protestant eschatology, Protestant theology, and Protestant eschatology. So this idea of historical salvation in history, yeah. I mean, it's extraordinary, yeah. I mean, it's really, I mean, from my point of view, totally perverse and completely a nonsensical idea that one could actually be saved in history. I mean, you've just taken two categories which have to do with two different worlds altogether, and kind of confuse them, yeah. So basically, both historically and conceptually, we take apart the idea of progress, historicize it, and show it for. I mean, really, we cannot. I mean, this is to my mind, one of the main points of cognitive damage. Yeah, is this idea of progress? The amount of cognitive damage that the idea of progress has done and is doing today, because despite all the fashions that you have in the academy, people read Benjamin and it's very sexy, etc. But when he talks about that famous angel, I mean, it's become a cliche. Everybody cites that analysis of Paul Klee's painting, yeah. But they don't pay attention to what and the significance of what is actually being said there. The angel, who has his, Back to the Future, is looking at this, just garbage piling up in front of him, yeah, which is what he calls progress, yeah. I mean, it's just enormous destruction and damage, yeah, is what Benjamin is testifying, yeah. So it's very important to my mind that to repair, as part of that reparative project, yeah, if our cognition is to be restored or repaired, that we recognize, that's one of the tasks, that we recognize that the kind of damage that this obscene idea of progress, yeah, really it's an obscene. I mean, it's really just, I mean, from the point of view of most of not just all the other species on this planet, but from the point of view of most of the human species, it's just a smack. It's really a slap in your face, yeah, to insist on this on progress. Huh? I mean, it's just obscene.
And in many ways, this kind of critique of progress has become central to decoloniality anyway. I mean, it's
yes, absolutely. Yes, exactly.
Specifically on
I
mean, Amy Allen's
absolutely
progress is the most obvious one, which I did with my students a couple of terms ago. But yeah.
Sorry, who did you just cite?
Amy Allen, The End of Progress. It came out.
Yes, yes, of course, yes. But of course, it's a long tradition. I mean, I'm not, I'm not inventing all this stuff myself. Of course, there's this entire inheritance of anti-colonial and decolonial thought. Decolonial, of course, is much more significant. The anti-colonial was, as we now know, and that's a lot of what we do at Habib as well, is to talk about the extent. So the next module after the progress bit is political modernity. Yeah. And it's which is basically about the emergence of the nation state. First, the absolutist state, which is of course the modern state. That's a very important to recognize, is that the absolutist state is the early modern state. Yeah, it's not the form of the pre-modern state, which is what a lot of the late Enlightenment figures actually tried to portray it as if it was the absolutist state is a feudal state or a medieval state. It's not. It's not a pre-modern state. The absolutist state is a modern state. But then, of course, the standard form of the modern state is the nation state. So the nation state, but also they do both the nation state in political modernity, and they do the colonial state, which is of course also a modern state. That's a very, very important thing to recognize in so many of its features. First of all, in its apartheid character. No pre-modern state was an apartheid state. I mean, that's just that can be elaborated at length. I don't think we have that much time.
No.
Yeah. So the apartheid state, the apartheid feature of it, the fact is, I mean, everybody knows it's the first time in the case of India, in the case of South Asia, it's the first time that the first corporation in the history of the world and the first corporate state, completely changed the character of statecraft. The business of statecraft was not making a profit. That's absurd. So it's precisely a capitalist corporate state that completely transforms the nature of statecraft, the nature of the relationship between the state and the population, which itself is, of course, a modern category. So then they do economic modernity, modernity and ecology, and then modernity and religion. And that's the other thing that that's absolutely essential to the reparative project for all of us. Is that religion? I mean, the category itself is modern, but whatever it is that you're calling religion has been completely transformed. I mean, in over the past, I mean, in our region, especially, as you know, over the past 150 years in particular, all of these religions have been nationalized and racialized. So the difference between Hindus and Muslims today is not the difference between two religions, it's two races. It's now becoming increasingly clear, even in India. They think of Muslims as a separate race, and Muslims think of themselves as a separate race from Hindus. So that this complete transformation, this is modern religion, modern national religion. So they do that, and then they do modernity in South Asia, which is the elaboration of these global processes. That's the other problem with nationalism and all of our modern ways of thinking, is that we think that we each live on a separate planet. In fact, we are very much part of, there's a completely intermeshed histories and intermeshed ways of thinking, etc. So then that is elaborated on the regional level, that modern history. So they get to see at length, for instance, the transformation of regional traditions and religions. And then finally, moving back, then they do hikmah, which of course is one of your favorite themes. I think, your blog might have been at the back of my head when I was thinking about this. So hikmah, the history of Islamic thought. And of course, it's very, very expansive notion of whatever you call Islam. So it seeks to, I mean, and obviously this is a key point of reparation, of the reparative, of the need for a reparative framework and of the need for a reparative work. And cognitive, once again, it's a cognitive question. So the most basic concepts of religion, starting with God, who people have now started thinking of as being, Allah being their national God or something, the God of the Arabs. Right? I mean, there couldn't be
worse, the God of the Pakistanis. Or even more specifically of some Pakistanis.
Right. Yes. From Rabbul Alameen to Rabbul Muslimin to Rabbul Pakistanin, right?
I mean, obviously, for those who are watching, you're welcome to send any comments, any questions, and we'll try to deal with them. But let me take it a bit further. I mean, of course, what's interesting is how you've got this kind of notion of the liberal education, right? And the great works, which of course were part of the liberal arts college ethos. And in a sense, what you've done is you've kind of exploded it to a certain extent, right? And that explosion is happening in lots of contexts. I mean, that's happening primarily through deep colonial studies at the moment. But I think what's interesting is the different positionalities. So the sort of things that we perhaps do in a British academic context is a bit different to what you would do in Pakistan and India, perhaps. And in some ways, it seems to me that you have a greater flexibility, or you should have a greater flexibility about what you can do. Because there is, as you know, in the British context, there is this increasing oblivion of the colonial experience, right? You know, the sort of rewriting of empire as a good thing. You know, it was great. Trains ran on time. People got, you know, representative assemblies, and you got courts of law, and you got democratic institutions, and of course we were all forced to learn English. You know, all those sorts of things. So these are all good. But of course, from a and to some extent, that oblivion has also happened in South Asia.
Totally. I mean, absolutely. I mean, the literate classes get very upset if you talk about colonialism. Yeah. I mean, go ahead.
But what I'm saying is that, in a sense, it should be easier to engage in that critique of colonial knowledge, so to speak, colonialist knowledge. But also, in many ways, it should also be easier to engage with what the sorts of cultural and intellectual inheritances there are in that context, right? And how you use those inheritances to, you know, form the sort of the ethical person, right? And I think what you're trying to do, it reminds me a bit of, you know, Wael Hallaq's current project. You know, Hallaq's project is very much, as we've discussed, it's about, you know, the whole ethics of education. You know, why are we engaged in education? Why is it that people want to go to university? It's not just an instrumental means to an end, which is some sort of good, you know, progressive job in which you progressively earn more money and you acquire greater material wealth and status and power and so forth. But, you know, what is it that we're actually doing in the classroom? What is it that we're doing, what we're engaging with our students? What is the end of education? And I think in that sense, that's precisely why this sort of practice, this sort of decolonial practice, this sort of reparative curriculum is absolutely essential. I wonder if you would say something about, as you know, a lot of people of a certain type are very critical of this. It's like the sort of, you know, pushback we had, for example, in Britain, about the, you know, the roads must fall kind of campaigns. Right. And as you know, there are lots of attempts at diversifying and decolonializing curricula across campuses in this country, but they are not without pushback, right?
Well, it's the same here. I mean, when you started out saying that it would be easier here, it's by no means the case. I mean, you know, one of our mutual colleagues, I won't mention the name to save the person embarrassment, maybe, but rightly observed that they had never been in a space where white people so admire, as in Pakistan. Yeah, I mean, it's just it's amazing. It's the entire, because in Pakistan, what ends up happening is you practically have none of the anti-colonial tradition left, because the entire nationalist narrative has now completely focused on Hindus. Yeah. As a result, they've completely forgotten the entire anti-colonial struggle has been forgotten. Yeah,
and also the Marxists have been forgotten as well, who are very much part of that kind of anti-colonial movement.
Yeah, well. that too. That was brutally repressed also. But you know, I mean, the problem is that within Marxism itself, within progressivism itself, there's a very, very uncritical attitude towards modernity and progress. I mean, after all, they call themselves progressives. Yeah, so they're deeply invested in this category. Yeah. So within the academy itself, even though, of course, now, you know, like I was saying, it's kind of sexy, Benjamin, etc. Yeah. But the fact of the matter is that people are very, very deeply invested in this absolutely destructive, cognitively destructive. I mean, first of all, I'm a teacher. Yeah, I'm not a politician. Yeah. My first my first concern
You wouldn't be a
is
very successful politician in Pakistan.
yeah, but my first concern is with cognition. Yeah, as a teacher, as somebody who tries to think. Yeah,
Yeah.
My first concern is cognition. It's a cognitively absolutely. I mean, you read in the newspaper every day reports telling you that we don't know whether we're even going to last a few more decades on this planet. Yeah, I mean the situation is just horrific. Yeah, and yet you're going on about progress. I mean, what? I mean, it's a form of insanity. Yeah, which
I mean, it's interesting that what's happening at the moment with COVID-19 and stuff is symptomatic of lots of the basic ills of the world, and yet surprisingly we are not seriously rethinking how we're doing things. And this is not just how we're rethinking things like how the economy works or how politics works. We've got like simple patches, like you've got like virtual parliaments and stuff like that going on, but we're not even really thinking about how we teach and how education works. And it seems to me that I don't know. I mean, I don't know how we would do that, but it does seem to me that we do need to think about what the functions of education are. What is a university for? And is the current sort of universalized notion of the university, is it really good fit for purpose? Noor, our mutual friend, just commented a bit earlier up on saying that perhaps the problem for this sort of practice of reparative curriculum, or even of decolonizing the curriculum, is that the university is not a structure which allows that, right?
No, she is of course, as always, sagacious. She's absolutely right. Yeah. I mean, if you think about it, people like you and me, we can see both our backgrounds. You can see my background. I can see your background. We live very bourgeois lives, yeah?
Yeah.
I mean, historically, the profession of scholarship has required of us. I mean, that Makdisi's book, The Rise of Colleges in Islam and the West, it starts out with those lovely quotes from two medieval scholars, one Muslim and one Christian, and both of them, talk about the outline or sketch the basic qualities that are needed to become a scholar. And both of them share a number of qualities, one of them being poverty. Yeah? This is not something that is even acceptable to people like us anymore. And in any case, that's not, as Noor was pointing out, it's the structure of the university. Yeah. I mean, it's the structure of the modern university. I mean, the modern research university in particular, was created by, the Prussian state to service it's the project of enlightenment. We are engaged in that very project, and we were, good the Bürgerlich, what is the Kultur Bürgerliche or something like that. I can't remember the German expression right now. But basically, you're part of the police, in fact. Yeah. So the word police, of course, meant something different from it. Has a relationship with policy, but you're basically in charge of creating the proper bourgeois culture for the advancement of the state and for the advancement of capitalism, really. Yeah. So that's structurally, that's where you are. Yeah. So
that's not only dealt with extensively in Bourdieu as well. The whole point about you go through certain processes so that you become acclimatized to a certain club of belonging, and you make it sound like attractive by creating a whole set of rituals of how this works. Things like graduation ceremonies and exams. I mean, exams are very much ritual as well as trauma, I think, for a lot of people.
But
absolutely,
a very important part of that is salaries, though. I mean, our salaries. Yeah. And in Pakistan too, I mean, India, the culture of education has totally transformed over the course of liberalization. Yeah. I mean, the Indian academics, even just 30, 40 years ago, it's crazy how much has changed in just 30, 40 years. Just 30, 40 years ago, these incredible scholars that, you and I grew up admiring, had very, very simple lives, extraordinarily simple lives, that, is just not acceptable to any of our, any of our colleagues today, yeah?
Yeah,
And that
because,
includes us.
to a large extent, people still do see it as it's a job, right? And one expects certain things out of a job.
Yeah.
So, and I think
And on
that
top of
kind of,
that, there's, yeah,
and that
go ahead.
commercialization, it works, of course, both ways, because then, of course, students have certain expectations, right? And this, of course, relates to, in the States, of course, it's even greater because of things like fees, etc., which are much greater level. But there is a sense in which they are buying services. So it's not they are acquiring an education, or that they are helping to understand what it means to be human, which is what
Yeah.
you could say maybe that's why people read Sadi back in the day, right? Because they want
Right.
to cultivate their humanity. I mean, there's a sense of kind of nostalgia there as well. But certainly once it becomes a set of transactions, and being in the classroom becomes a transaction of that sort, I think that's precisely a problem, and I don't understand how we can. I mean, I think that element of repairing the way in which education is seen. So it's these kind of wider categories, as you mentioned, like modernity and the ecology and the world we live in, the colonial structures and so forth, and the very notions of epistemology, but also much more focused on, how do we see education itself? What do we see the function of education? What do we see the function of the university to be? And it's often a lone voice now and then who sort of says, well, no, universities are not supposed to be about filling people with skills that they can use in the workspace so they can earn more, but rather should be about the formation of the person. So
yeah,
I don't know. I mean,
and the ability
I
to
think
think.
maybe, yeah.
That's what we should be engaged in, the ability to think. Yeah. And the formation of the person, yes, related to and the two are inextricably intertwined. Yeah. And the fact of the matter is that education is not like, it's not like soap or a car. It's not simply not possible to reduce it to that kind of commodity, because all of these other commodities are means, and education is an end in itself. Knowledge is an end.
Yeah.
It's not a means.
But at the same time, it's being quantified, right? So we
yes.
quantify it all the time. We quantify in terms of giving marks to people. We give it, we quantify it in terms of, thresholds and that people need to meet, so that they can be recognized in some way. So I think that quantification is very much part of that, and maybe an element of the reparative process has to be that we really, I mean, it sounds like, again, when I say these things and you kind of hear yourself saying this, and you think this sounds totally nostalgic and old school, but the replacement of quantity for quality, right? So we need to go back to a notion of quality and what the wider context is of what we're trying to do, and move away from quantity. Recently I've been reading again after many years René Guénon's work, and I mean, there's lots of things which one can say about his critique of modernity, which anyway might be a bit strange. But one thing which I think he gets absolutely right is in his work, The Reign of Quantity. The very way in which we have become obsessed with numbers, large or small, right? And also the desire to quantify everything. And if it cannot be quantified, it cannot be given a value. And this also goes into things like, I guess what you might call, in a European sense, people talk about doing scientific research, sort of establishing what a text is, finding its origin, being able to pinpoint a certain genetic origins of a text, like the Quran, for example. These are very much kind of the things which he definitely argues comes under the reign of quantity.
Yes, it's an extraordinary destructive process. I mean, quantitative reasoning itself is only subordinate to, or is only secondary to, qualitative thinking. I mean, if you didn't have any categories at all, what would you count?
Yeah.
So it's just turned everything upside down. Yeah? And it's an enormously destructive reduction of education. In fact, people think that the moment that they have shown something to be a function, the moment they've shown something to be a function, they've made some kind of a cognitive leap. Yeah. But I mean, in the process, you actually destroy the process, that the phenomenon that you're actually trying to understand or analyze. Yeah. Right.
I mean, how would you? I mean, I know this sounds like possible quantification, but how would you assess the possible success of a reparative curriculum?
Well, I mean, that's why I say
the wrong question.
No, it's not. I mean, that's partially why it's called towards a reparative curriculum. I mean, the kind of trouble. I mean, when you go into therapy, yeah, it actually takes just years and years. Yeah. I mean, it can go on for the rest of your life. Of course, we know that Freud actually thought that it should go on for, everybody should have a therapist, and it should go on for the rest of one's life. I mean, that makes that makes a lot of sense to me. But thinking of it in terms of cognition, once again, I mean, the damage is so huge. Yeah, the damage. And by the way, the nostalgia thing that you were. I've ceased being troubled by this category, of nostalgia. To me, it's not a problem at all, because initially I didn't understand why, when people said that something was nostalgic or nostalgia, why that was supposed to be critical. Why did it have any critical purchase at all? And then, in order to find out, I went and did some research and found out that, in fact, from its beginning, nostalgia is a pathological category. It was invented by this Swiss doctor in 1678, Johannes Hofer, his name was, to name a disease, homesickness. Yeah. Okay. And then the soldiers got homesickness. Entire battalions supposed to have died of nostalgia, because it was considered to be a contagious condition. This was in the Enlightenment. Nostalgia, the identification of nostalgia as a disease. This is an Enlightenment. This is an Enlightenment phenomenon. Yeah. I mean, people who are actually soldiers. What's his name? Napoleon's Surgeon General, very famous in the history of military medicine. He writes in his diaries that when he cut open, the soldiers' skulls who had died of nostalgia, he found a particular part of the brain that was suppurating. Yeah. Right. So, soldiers are actually disciplined for nostalgia. And then when modern criminology was invented, they said nostalgia was a cause for crime. Yeah. Right. So it's this completely pathological history that this term has. Yeah. So, I mean, I simply fail to understand how is it possible to think that everything in the past was bad. It's just an completely absurd idea. Yeah. Especially today, yeah, when so much has been utterly ruined, and we are facing the consequences of all the ruin and the damage. Yeah, to think that the past is bad. I mean, it's it's just so reductive and crude, really. So one should really not be worried when people say these kinds of things to one, because they make no sense. They don't know what they're saying. Actually, they don't know where they get these ideas and categories from. Yeah, it's very much a part of their own pathological modern formation. Yeah, right.
I mean,
Yeah.
do you find, I know you've been, you know, linking up with other universities and other academics across the, you know, what's sometimes called the global south. But
Right.
is this this kind of rethinking of liberal education, is it really catching on in other places? You know, in a systematic way? Because I know obviously you have a very systematic curriculum in terms of how you do it, but are there lots of other places which are doing? I mean, I think South Africa, I've heard of lots of kind of attempts at a decolonial curriculum in South Africa, but are there other examples you can think of? I mean, is it happening in Bangladesh? Is it happening? I assume it is happening in India to a certain extent, although India has its own problems in academia at the moment.
Well, you know, I mean, yeah. Well, as a systematic curriculum, I'm not really aware because, I mean, I'm a lot of my own education. So, you know, I've been totally formed by the subaltern studies. I already mentioned Ashish Nandi before that. So, you know, I mean, Indian scholarship was absolutely essential for my own formation. But as a systematic curriculum, I'm not aware that it's actually being done anywhere. It might just be my own ignorance, but I'm not aware. I must say that when I haven't had that much of an opportunity to visit Africa, but I went to South Africa last year for a couple of weeks, thanks to a couple of friends in Cape Town at Western Cape and at the University of Cape Town, and I just had a blast. I mean, it was just great being there, the conversations that it was possible to have, and I just felt liberated, really. I mean, in Pakistan, I have to say it's you know, slim pickings. Yeah, and people, it's a really uphill task because, you know, people are just so completely colonized. Yeah, I mean, the level of colonization is just phenomenal. Yeah, I mean, just by this term, so I use the word Gora all the time. Yeah. Which is, you know, I mean, if you're an African or if you're a Native American, for instance, and you said white people, nobody would bat an eyelid, yeah, in our circles, yeah. How else are they supposed to talk about their experience? It would not be possible for an African, for an African American, for a Native American to talk about their experience at all if they were told, okay, you cannot say white, yeah,
because it's racist.
Yeah. So that would mean that would mean that they simply could not talk about their experience. Yeah, it's like a ban. It's like putting a ban on your access to your own experience. That ban exists in South Asia. Yeah, especially in Pakistan. Yeah, because the moment you say Gora, people say, I mean, because they don't understand anything, people say, oh, you're being racist.
Yeah,
I'm sorry, this is a historical phenomenon. We did not, I mean, first of all, they invented the word Gora. Yeah, they created an apartheid state. Yeah, and they said, we are Gora and you are Kala, and created a world around those categories, right?
Yeah, the ways that the colonial history was set out was divided. I mean, this was in French colonies, it was in English colonies, in British colonies. I mean, this is
everywhere. I mean, they created an apartheid world.
Yeah, the spatial separations were very, very clear. I mean, there's no
absolutely, it's totally material and spatial. Yeah, so you created an apartheid world, and then you said, okay, now you cannot say Gora. Huh? So that means you cannot describe the world. Yeah, you cannot describe the world. You cannot describe your historical experience. You cannot articulate. So as a result, you have no idea who you are, where you are, what's going on, right? What the future of this thing is. All of it is, you know. So this is what I mean when I say cognitive damage. Yeah.
I think you know. I think what's needed is you need to write a book about this.
Fine, inshallah. I mean,
I think and the book needs to reflect on the experience of actually teaching this, because I think that would be really, really interesting and useful for people. It's not just kind of the theoretical laying out of this kind of map, but also the reflection on what worked and what did not work in the classroom.
Right.
I think you know, sometimes I think we do need to reflect a bit more on what does and does not work in the classroom.
actually, it works phenomenally. I mean, the students are transformed by this. They really, for them, the world starts making sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
It puts them at a huge advantage. And when they go elsewhere, like, we have these programs where they go for their summer program to Stanford and Michigan and, some of the best universities that they have in the United States, and they come back and they say, those guys don't know anything. Yeah. Because literally they come out at the top of their class because they understand the world so much better. Yeah. No wonder. Most people are going around with, cognitively completely damaged right, categories and ways of thinking and ways of knowing things. Yeah, no wonder they can't make sense of the world.
Yeah. We could go on for ages, but I'm just aware that it's been almost an hour, and we should probably bring things to a close. There are some more quick questions, but I don't want to take them because they will take longer to deal with. Of course, we can hopefully follow up in some other time, and if people have questions, they can comment in the thread perhaps. So anyway, it just leaves me to thank you, Nauman. Thank you for this conversation. Thank you for those who have watched.
Thank you. Pleasure.
Just to mention our next conversation, which is going to be on Thursday, I will be joined by Aparna Vedic from Ashoka University, and we'll be talking about her new book, My Son's Inheritance, which is a history of lynching in India. Well, a particular kind of history of lynching, but it should be interesting as well. And we'll basically continue our South Asian theme for this week. So thank you again, Nauman. Thank you for those watching.
Thank you, Sajjad.
As I mentioned before, the recording of this will go up on the Institute of Arab and Islamic Studies YouTube channel. So thank you once again, and hopefully see you soon. Bye now.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.